You lean in, turn this way, speak to the mic. You're out of frame. Don't slump.
It's called direction.
That's why you're in the firmer chair. I'm going to be in that chair from now on. Then you can slump. Take the biscuits off, otherwise it just looks like you're going to take the biscuits away? You're going to leave? No, you're going to keep them there. You're a comforter.
I'm going to leave them here.
Okay.
I don't want the biscuits here. This is not going to be good.
What are we going to talk about today?
So today we have another movie from the 80s. Oh, okay, hello everyone. So another one for the fans today, for the fanboys and girls. Another cult favorite based on another comic book. And would you like to introduce this one today? Briefly?
Well, we have the classic sci-fi movie Flash Gordon, made in 1980, produced by Dino de Laurentiis and directed by Mike Hodges. Two main characters are played by Sam Jones and Melody Anderson. A great supporting cast, including Max von Sydow, Brian Blessed, Timothy Dalton. Too many people to mention, actually.
So this is another Laurentiis production. So Laurentiis was very interested in making live-action adaptations of popular comic book strips and other books. So he did obviously Conan, which we went over in another episode, and he did Dune, and he did as well Flash Gordon, which I think was trying to capitalize on the success of Star Wars and the newfound attraction by sci-fi epics. And Flash Gordon is based on a seminal comic book strip from the 30s, published by King Features. Same guys that published Popeye. And Alex Raymond, he was the author, the writer, and the artist behind it. A guy that really was an illustrator. So Flash Gordon, the original book, really is a sumptuous illustrated comic book, from the decor, all the backgrounds, to the characters and all the hardware, the spaceships. Alex Raymond really does an amazing job. He previously had worked on other comic strips, and he went on to eventually stop working on Flash Gordon to work on other jobs as well. But Flash Gordon is his main book, and the one that he met with the greatest success. So you were wondering what sort of narrative Flash Gordon really is as a comic book. So it really is in that same vein as Prince Valiant. That sort of what we would call the boy's own adventures. So it really is a swashbuckling adventure set in space.
Set in space, but science fiction, obviously, as well.
Well, yeah, it has a component of science fiction. I mean, one of the main characters is obviously Hans Zarkov, which is a scientist, he's an astronomer. Yes, there's a lot of proper scientific sci-fi component to it. But it's mainly a story about really this megalomaniac, so to speak, dictator that really, just like the movie shows it, keeps a series of subjugated kingdoms under his foot. It really is just a story of a hero taking down this fascist dictator, really. And the reason I like Flash Gordon very much, the movie, is that I believe it adapts the whole comic book strip very much to the word. So it really is a proper adaptation. And obviously you have the set design and the wardrobe really paying proper justice.
Can I just stop you there for a moment?
Yes?
You need to put your mic back.
Oh, shit. So the movie from 1980, the Flash Gordon, produced by Dino Laurentiis, because up until now there's no other one, although there was the serial made back in the 30s by Republic Pictures. But in this movie, they really follow to the word the comic book, and both the set design and the wardrobe really is a very faithful adaptation of exactly what Alex Raymond draws. And again, Alex Raymond is a very precise illustrator with very lush backgrounds and very well delineated characters. So he's an old guard, old fashioned illustrator. So if anyone knows Prince Valiant, he is in that vein of art. Is very well depicted, everything in it, all the hardware and the software and the decors and all that. And then the movie really does a very, very faithful job in copying that. It really is a facsimile of what you see on the page, done in live action. I think maybe if you would do a new version of this movie today, using CGI instead of models, you probably would get even a little bit closer if you add a little bit more polished decor, because obviously the decor, the set, and the wardrobe in this movie is very much is very much Art Deco, basically. So there's a lot of that component there. It's obviously being stripped from the 30s anyway. So again, he's really mimicking what Alex Raymond does on the page. But you could probably go one step even further if you would to go and do a new version in our days, which I think they tantalizingly have been trying to.
I think it might be slightly problematic. I mean, I think they've tried to remain faithful to the thinking of the 1930s, and I don't think that's going to work very well in the current days. I mean, the evil Emperor Ming is clearly a sort of East Asian stereotype and sort of the Fu Manchu heritage, but clearly unacceptable today for modern audiences.
After the earthquakes and tidal waves, they won't be quite the human beings you remember. They'll be more tractable, easier for you to rule in the name of Ming.
You mean slaves?
Let's say they'll be satisfied with less.
What about Dale?
Dale, we have decided to marry her. She's exceptional. We will breed with her and send our imperial progeny back to populate your Earth. You really prefer death to a kingdom? I'm disappointed. I'd much rather see you on my side than scattered into atoms. But as you wish.
Okay, well, me and Ian, we have a disagreement on this feature film, and obviously it would be for you guys to decide who do you agree with most. Well, I think on the whole is a very entertaining movie, well done feature film, meaning the budget is well employed. A lot of times we do fail to see that on screen, actually, so there's a lot of money in productions, which a lot of times actually spills out of the glass and is not actually present on the screen. I think that works very well in Flash Gordon. Whatever they spent there is actually there for you to appreciate.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with the direction. For me, is well paced. The scenes are the scenes you need. The movie is basically a crowd pleaser. Is almost like family focused entertainment. Really, you have plain old-fashioned black and white characters. A leads to B, B leads to the conclusion, which is C, and that's pretty much it. I mean, there's obviously the thing with Flash Gordon is that there's a lot of voices against it because they mostly do not appreciate the aesthetic of the movie. They believe that the color scheme of it is a little bit misplaced, either too red or too green. So there's always a lot of bit too much of something. And nonetheless, the wardrobe and the set design, the work that was done with it and for it, not being in questioning, Although there's a certain feeling by the critics of the movie that is a little bit over the top. But again, that's all in the source material. And again, this is a very visually is for me and for most of the people that do know the original and have watched comic book adaptations over the years, this is probably the most faithful ever adaptation of a comic book to the big screen.
Maybe that's exactly what the problem is.
Exactly, that seems to be one of your points of contention. The other ones we might go there later, but you tend to fall into that batch of critics that believes that movie is a little bit too much on the palette, on the visual palette. Before we go to the actual other problems that you find with the movie, would you like to add anything to that? Fuck do you know?
No, yeah. Don't do that. Don't do that.
Fuck no, in front of everybody. I went live.
You have the
This is
stage.
live.
You have the stage.
This is a live. Okay, so you basically concede that the movie is well shot and his color scheme is not aggressive, so it's a wonderful depicted movie. Obviously, you tend to find to fall into that batch of critics that finds the tone of the movie a little bit ambivalent, isn't it? So
That's right. I mean, my feeling is you've got the producer, the scriptwriter, and the director, and they all seem to be slightly pulling in different directions. I think the producer had a very clear image of how he wanted to present Flash Gordon.
which would be
Well, he wanted to see it more as a comedy,
Right.
from what my reading is,
Which-
and that
because-
that's why he'd commissioned Lorenzo Semple to write the script for it, who he'd worked with a couple of times in the 70s, and he wrote some quite good scripts for American political thrillers, but also. Rather bizarrely, he was the creator behind the Batman TV series of the 1960s,
Right.
and he wanted that sort of feeling for the movie. And I think the scriptwriter wanted to make it a bit more serious, a bit more authentic
True to the original text.
true to the original text. And the director, again, making a movie, a sci-fi movie after Star Wars, a great director, British director, Mike Hodges. I think that's a key point as well, that it's a British production, it's not an American production.
yeah.
Is taking a slightly tongue-in-cheek approach to the movie. So what I see is basically three creative people pulling in slightly different directions, and that's not making for a cohesive movie, a movie that's going to knit together very well.
So wouldn't you think that Laurentiis could have his own idea and grab the screenplay writer with those intentions, but then the screenplay writer kind of toning down probably what Laurentiis wanted, which was the campy feel and making it more tongue-in-cheek, and then Mike Hodges coming in and wanting to make it more straight? Don't you think like the screenwriter and the director kind of went their own way, a little bit away from Laurentiis, and they kind of seized the creative control, and they kind of almost like behind the door they could have said to the Laurentiis, look, this is the right way to do this movie, not the way you were thinking of. So keep the Baroque elements in the design, but play it more like a straight family entertainment adventure, because that's what really Flash Gordon is on paper. So I believe it still works. I don't see those conflicting elements that you mentioned.
Well, I mean, what one can say about it is there's certainly an absence of the high seriousness that we saw in the first Superman movie.
Yes.
That was made, I think, 2 years previously. And I think there's a certain affinity with the design at the beginning of the planet Krypton, and sort of the feel and the sort of textural feel of
Superman.
Yes, the textural feel, but without that high seriousness.
Well, yeah, I mean, Superman was a movie, like I always said, it took itself too seriously. I still think the design is very different. Superman, especially the Krypton sequences, they tend to be a bit more monochromatic.
Much more monochromatic, but it's sort of that soft lens and slight overexposure and sort of shininess to it.
That's the way Richard Donner shoots the whole of Superman.
But I'm saying that's what I feel about Flash Gordon.
Oh, really? Well, I mean, the soft shots in Flash Gordon,
They get a bit in the way for me.
Well, they're delegated to the optic shots, which are far in between, and to the optics. To the shots with the scenes with Melody and Anderson, really the love interest of Flash Gordon, the American actress.
Well, my perception of the movie is that it's pretty much throughout the whole movie.
Yeah, most of those, really. I mean, if we're talking about scene by scene, shot by shot, the really soft lensed ones, they're really the ones where mostly the female protagonists are included. So it's the ones with Ornella Muti, and really there's an what we can call an overexposure of a soft shot, because all the shots with Ornella Muti, they're really soft lensed, all of them, and then the ones with Melody and Anderson as well.
And again, the colours are too strong.
Well, the colours are too strong
start giving me a headache, and particularly the effect for the skyline, which is a bit like sort of different paints being mixed together in a paint pot.
At the time when Flash Gordon came out, all that I could appreciate is what I still appreciate today, which is really a lot of people can consider an over the top attempt to do something. To recreate something that was well achieved on paper on a 2D medium like the comic. I see it as an attempt to use old filmmaking techniques. So from models to matte paintings to really standard old-fashioned effects, a little bit of blue screen here and there, and just use that and like grabbing the old serials, black and white serials, and give them a polish, a veneer of that more money allows, and just bringing them forward to the 80s.
I think that's part of the problem, is that I find it quite slow, and I think that's probably untrue to the original comic. And I think part of the issue is that you've got three different audiences, perhaps, potentially. One audience that's familiar, like you were, with the original comic. A second audience that is probably quite familiar with the black and white serials of the 1930s and 40s that starred Buster Crabbe that Lewis referred to earlier.
Yeah.
And fourthly, an audience that's not familiar with the material at all and is probably expecting something more akin to Star Wars. And I was reflecting as well that, what kind of the audience were hoping for was something pretty much that Lucas had done or said that he wanted to do with Indiana Jones, is take those Republic series of the 1930s and recreate them in the 1980s with the contemporary techniques of the time. And I think that's the problem, is that Flash Gordon, and I must apologise now if I occasionally refer to Flesh Gordon instead.
Yeah, your favourite movie.
is it's too slow and not dynamic enough for the material.
Remote control. Come on!
Zarkov, he's tilting it. Flash! Watch out!
I think it plays out as it's a textbook adaptation. Again, I have to insist on that key.
Well, it depends which textbook you're using, though.
Well, again, I mean, Alex Raymond is being a writer from the 30s. He's using old literary tropes in terms of the way he actually tells a story. It is a wordy
They're quite
texts.
conventional. They're quite sort of academic.
Yeah, academic. The Alex Raymond is. I won't censor him for being academic because he's a wonderful illustrator. But in terms of his writing, Flash Gordon really reads as a very old-fashioned kind of swashbuckling story. I mean, probably the equivalent, if we really want to nitpick, it would probably be something in the vein of the Scarlet Pimpernel, something in the vein of Walter Scott, Ivanhoe, that sort of writing.
Or the sort of Errol Flynn swashbuckling movies of the 1940s. I mean, I think Timothy Dalton plays, not for the first time in his career, incidentally, an Errol Flynn type character.
Yeah, he does fancies himself as an Errol Flynn lookalike with his silly mustache.
But that's part of the problem, is that, you know, you're talking about a cinematic and a narrative language that doesn't really suit the late 1970s.
Yeah. Well, that's the problem.
I got you there.
So could Flash Gordon be a movie out of his time? Because it's got the camp element, which is an attempt to modernize the actual environment.
Both of us agree that we don't particularly see it as a camp movie, but it's sort of it's the campness of it that has secured its reputation as a cult movie. At least that's my perception.
And again, when we say camp, we have really to find in the movie what classifies it and defines it as camp. Is it A, the overacting? Is it B, the Baroque-esque sets?
Mm-hmm.
Because in terms of filmmaking, in terms of the pace of the movie, there's nothing camp about it. Again, you even say slow, and that's the antithesis of being camp. Camp stuff is usually pacier, is briskier.
Well, I think part of the zest of the movie is that there's a lot of sexuality and implied sexuality in it. And I know you sort of described it earlier as a family viewing, but most of the characters are motivated by some sort of sexual interest in one of the other characters. And I think perhaps that's part of the reason why it's sort of got that slight edge to it. That
absolutely,
again secures its reputation. I don't think it's apart from obviously the explicit nature of the material, it's not that far removed from the somewhat famous soft blue porn version of it, Flesh Gordon.
Well, I mean, probably you can find parallels, for example, with Barbarella.
Absolutely, yes, exactly.
But I think Flash Gordon doesn't go that far. I mean, the sexual.
I think that has to be in Mike Hodges' mind.
Sure enough. I mean, but the sexualized, I don't want to call it sexual, I'll call it sexualized elements of it. They're also part of the strip. Again, because this is a very faithful adaptation, like I mentioned to you before. Ming as a court of concubines. Ming's daughter is a teaser. And this is in the book. So when they're doing it straight, I mean, there's some ambivalence there. Is a tricky is a tricky plot. What I said is that in essence, it is a traditional old-fashioned swashbuckling adventure set in space. But obviously, when you go through the story and you delve on the characters, on the supporting characters as well. There's more there. There's more intrigue there. There's other layers to it, and I think that's all captured in the movie. And I think being a movie done well, it's a '70s movie, early '80s, whatever. Yeah, exactly. When actually doing that, I think it works to his advantage because you can exploit that more. You can exploit those more risque ideas that are present in the book originally, but probably passed under the radar.
Do you, Ming the Merciless, ruler of the universe, take this earthling, Dale Arden, to be your empress of the hour?
Of the hour, yes.
You promise to use her as you will?
Certainly.
Not to blast her into space? Until such time as you grow weary of her?
I do.
I do not.
Flash!
I think it begs a question that what audience exactly do you think it was aimed at?
My opinion about it was always this, and I started by mentioning this. For me is the intention is a crowd pleaser for a family audience. Now, when saying that, I'm not saying, okay, well...
And how was that reflected in its box office and critical reception?
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, it was not a big success. We all know that. The thing is that I think the great, for me, the great accomplishment of the Laurentiis company is that we're trying to diversify their portfolio as much as possible. They were very dedicated.
Well, full
to
credit to them for that.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, there's a lot to be said for good old Dino.
They adapted a lot of stuff that was said to be unadaptable. One of the examples, Dune, for example. And every time they did it they went all the way in. They did it with all the courage. They were very faithful to the source material, really down to there. That's one of the criticisms aimed at the Laurentiis company, is that they always stuck to their guns, very faithful to the material. But I have no reasons of complaint to that, because if I'm doing an adaptation, I want to be faithful to the material and then go one step further and do a little bit more of what you would like to add to it. That's what always been discussed between a great adaptation and a proper adaptation. That's two different things. So as always, the directors and the companies that will grab a previously released material make just a straight adaptation, and the ones that will grab the material and make something else out of it, something better, something bigger.
Which is sort of the Indiana Jones analogy, I think.
Well, but that's not the previously available. That's like based on the serials, basically.
Yes, it was taking the spirit of what they remembered.
Yes, for example, I was thinking more in the vein of the Maltese Falcon, for example. John Huston adapts those kinds of books, and the Earl Stanley Gardners and all that is actually adding something to it. He's adding the noir essence, which was not necessarily there. And that's, for example, the problem that we have with the Lord of the Rings adaptation. He's not adding anything else to the book. He's just really grabbing something that is on the page and putting it on the screen for you. So he's doing all the work for you, and there's nothing else there for you to engage with apart from appreciating it as a work of art, as a commercial work of art. I think there's more to be said in defense of Flash Gordon. I think Flash Gordon... he thus manages to go that step further. Basically, what he does is just, and I believe that's the intention of Mike Hodges in terms of aesthetic terms. He wants to place you inside the comic book. He really wants to realize, or at least probably Laurentiis' idea was, he really wants to make those pages physically real. Physically real. He wants to grab the panels on Alex Raymond's book.
Well, I mean, I'm not familiar with the original material, but I would think that one of the defining characteristics of a comic book would be pace, and that's something that I feel is missing from the film.
Yeah, that's one of the criticisms you've been aiming at it. I find the pace fine. You believe it's too slow in parts. I'm happy with it. I don't think the film is too long. I think all the scenes work. The only thing I could see is that the structure of the movie is so academic that it's a fanfare, basically. It's like, the hero is going to save the day in the end.
Yeah, it's not so save the day, save the heroine, save the earth.
That's the only point
just another day at the office for Flash.
That's the only finger that I could point at it, saying, I know where all this goes. But I think it's a journey. I think the journey is the fun, is to see the spectacle of enjoying an old-fashioned swashbuckling thing, kind of almost being a pastiche of what is actually on a page of a book, and turning it real, and then leaving you to enjoy it. As I said, it's like there's big differences between, again, adapting something and adding something to it, not just making a straight adaptation. I think Flash Gordon falls, and that's what I was trying to get at. Flash Gordon, for me, actually falls in the first category. Is a straightforward adaptation. In the case of Flash Gordon, though, I think that's not a minus against it. I think he works in advantage of the movie because it really is all there is to enjoy is the spectacle and what it is. You have to enjoy for what it is, because it's coming from a place where the the material, the original material, and then you can enjoy it fully, basically.
The game's lost, Ming. Stop your attack on Earth and I'll spare your life.
You pitiful fool. My life is not for any earthling to give or take.
Your power's fading, Ming.
But obviously, without knowing the source material, yes, you might find yourself a little bit confused. You might, I might not find exactly the pacing to my liking, or maybe this is a bit over the top here and there, or is this like a joke? Is this for kids? Then the tone becomes a little bit uncertain.
But you're basically highlighting a very real problem about how we review movies and how we see them. Do we see them in the context of their time? Do we see them as a thing in itself, or do we see them as the product of what the inspiration of the movie is? And I think you have to see this movie really as a movie just in itself and view it and review it as such as well. How faithful it is to the original comic strip, in a way, is a bit of a blind alley. So I find myself slightly in the position of a devil's advocate on this film because, as I've said before, I like everyone, all the talent that's actually engaged with the movie, and I think it's very difficult to dislike the two main actors as well. But there's so much British talent that from this country we're very familiar with from the period, and. They've almost become sort of emblematic performances subsequently, particularly Brian Blessed and Peter Wyngarde. It's with a degree of regret that I can't actually enjoy the movie more than I really feel I should be able to.
Well, there you go. And you should start enjoying it more. You should watch it every day. A little bit every day, almost like a serial. Watch it like a serial, like 10 minutes at a time. It's a 2 hours movie, so you'll get there. It's less than 2 hours, I think. 110 minutes. All right, guys, thank you very much, and join us another time. Bye bye. Stream, you fuck. What is Wonder Woman gonna say about you? She's saying, well, you could have done something. You could have answered that guy. Come on, you're a man or a mouse.
I'm bound here by the Amazonian whip, I'm afraid.
Here we go. I'm gonna do this fight here.
An audience that was familiar with the light sense, a slight change in light there. Unlike what appears in Flash Gordon.
Very bright.
Yes, I know.
Do this here. Why the hell put it up here?
You did.
My belly's bigger now.
There's no way we can get around this.
Pushing my belly forward. That's where the beauty is. So I slow forward.
Always needed to be